Maggie's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the check. $5,000. That's what 25 years of marriage was worth to Brad Thornton. $5,000 and a bus ticket back to wherever you came from. She stared at her husband's signature on the divorce papers, and something inside her finally broke. Not her spirit, her silence. For 25 years, she had kept her secret. Tonight, she picked up a phone she hadn't touched in a quarter century and dialed the one person who could burn Brad's world to the ground. Before we continue, if you want to see how this satisfying story of justice unfolds, hit that subscribe button and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to Maggie's revenge. The rain had been falling on Chicago for 3 days straight, turning the city into a gray watercolor of misery. But inside the Thornton penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, the temperature had dropped to absolute zero. Maggie stood by the kitchen island, her fingers gripping the cold granite like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Across the living room, her husband of 25 years was adjusting his cufflinks in the hallway mirror, not even bothering to look at her while he delivered the death blow to their marriage. "I don't want to drag this out, Maggie." Brad's voice was smooth, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script he'd practiced in front of that same mirror. "My lawyer drew up the papers. It's simple. You leave, I stay. The company stays with me. The accounts stay with me. The penthouse, obviously, stays with me." Maggie felt something hot and suffocating rise in her throat. "Brad, we built this together. When we met, you were selling used cars off a lot in Cicero. I did the books. I drove the delivery van when your first 2 drivers quit the same week. I put every penny of my savings into the down payment for that warehouse on Halstead Street." Brad finally turned to face her. The smirk on his face was something she'd seen 1,000 times before, but tonight, it cut different. He walked to the dining table, where a thick stack of legal documents sat waiting like a death sentence. "Correction," he said, picking up a pen and twirling it between his fingers like this was all a game to him. "You were a secretary, Maggie. You answered phones. You made coffee. You smiled at clients and pretended you understood what I was building. I was the visionary. I was the one who landed the Walmart contract, the Amazon deal, the Target distribution agreement. You were just there, background noise. And honestly, you've become a liability." He tossed a folder toward her. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from her trembling hands. "What is this?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "A settlement offer." Brad checked his watch, a Rolex that she had bought him for their 10th anniversary. He didn't remember that anymore. $5,000, enough for a deposit on a rental somewhere. Maybe one of those extended stay motels near O'Hare. And a bus ticket to wherever you came from. Nebraska, right? Some nothing town I can't even remember the name of. "Brad, this company is worth $65 million. I helped build." "My company," he cut her off, his voice hardening to steel. "And you have no proof of anything, Maggie. No shares, no title, just a marriage certificate that's about to be shredded. You were a nobody when I found you. Some orphan girl from the middle of nowhere with a sad story and nothing to her name. I gave you a life. I gave you this penthouse, these clothes, everything you have. And now, I'm taking it back." The cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just the greed. It was the complete erasure of her existence. He was rewriting their entire history to fit some narrative in his head where he was a self-made god, and she was just a parasite he'd finally scraped off. "Is this because of her?" Maggie asked softly. "Because of Brittany?" Brad didn't even flinch at the name. "If you mean Brittany, then yes. She understands the world I live in now, Maggie. She's young. She's beautiful. She looks right standing next to me at charity galas and investor dinners. You look—" He paused, his eyes scanning her up and down with open disgust. "Tired. Old. Like someone's mother, not someone's wife." "I am someone's mother, Brad. I'm the mother of your children. Kids are grown. They don't need you hovering anymore. And neither do I." He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair and headed for the door. "I'm going to the office. When I get back tonight, I want you and your things gone. Sign the papers. Leave the keys on the counter. Take the check and disappear. Don't make me call building security to escort you out of my own home." "Your home?" Maggie's voice cracked. "Brad, I picked out every piece of furniture in this place. I chose the paint colors. I found this penthouse when you said we could never afford Lakeshore Drive." "And I paid for all of it." He opened the door. "You have until midnight, Maggie. After that, I'm changing the locks." The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Maggie stood frozen for a long moment, the silence pressing down on her like a physical weight. She looked at the folder on the table. She looked at the check inside it. $5,000. 25 years of her life, reduced to a number that wouldn't even cover 2 months of rent in this city. She walked slowly to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Below, the city lights of Chicago blurred through the rain. Somewhere down there, Brad was probably already on the phone with Brittany, laughing about how easy this had been, how pathetic his wife was, how she just rolled over and accepted her fate like the nobody he always said she was. But Brad had made a mistake, a terrible, catastrophic mistake. He believed the story she told him 25 years ago. He believed she was Maggie Hart, a poor orphan girl from a nothing town in Nebraska. No family, no connections, no one to turn to. He was wrong. Maggie walked to the bedroom closet, past the rows of designer clothes Brad had bought her over the years. Clothes she'd never felt comfortable in. Clothes that were costumes for a role she'd been playing for a quarter century. In the back corner, behind a stack of old photo albums, there was a shoebox. Inside that shoebox was a phone. A burner phone she'd kept charged but never used, waiting for a day she hoped would never come. She held it in her hands for a long moment. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. 25 years ago, she had made a choice. She'd walked away from everything, her family, her inheritance, her entire identity, because she wanted to find out if someone could love her for who she really was. Not for her last name, not for the zeros in her bank account, just for her. She thought Brad was that person. She thought he saw something in her that no one else had seen. She thought their love was real. She was wrong about that too. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number she still knew by heart, even after all these years. It rang once, twice. "Blackwood Steel Corporation, Executive Office. How may I direct your call?" Maggie closed her eyes. "I need to speak to William Blackwood." "I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood is in a board meeting and cannot be disturbed. May I take a message?" "Tell him—" Maggie's voice caught in her throat. She swallowed hard. "Tell him it's his sister. Tell him Maggie has come home. And tell him I need help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Please hold, ma'am." 30 seconds later, a voice came through that made Maggie's eyes fill with tears. "Maggie?" Her brother's voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher around the edges, but it was still Will. Still the big brother who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd threatened to beat up any boy who made her cry. "Maggie, is that really you?" "It's me, Will." "Where are you? Are you okay? What happened?" "I'm in Chicago, and no, I'm not okay." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Will, I made a mistake. I made a terrible mistake 25 years ago, and now it's all falling apart. That husband of yours. Will's voice went cold. Bradley Thornton, the logistics guy. Maggie froze. You know about him? Maggie, I've known where you were since 6 months after you left. I've had people keeping an eye on you. Not close, not interfering, but watching, making sure you were safe. He paused. I know everything about Brad Thornton. I know about his business. I know about his mistress. I know about the corners he cuts, and the lies he tells, and the way he treats you like you're beneath him. Then why didn't you ever say anything? Because you wanted to live your own life, Mags. You wanted to see if you could make it without the Blackwood name following you everywhere. I respected that, even when it killed me to watch you struggle with a man who wasn't worth the dirt on your shoes. Maggie sat down on the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. He's divorcing me, Will. He wants to throw me out with nothing. $5,000. That's what he thinks I'm worth. $5,000. Will's laugh was cold, dangerous. The man you funded to the tune of $500,000 thinks you're worth $5,000. How do you know about the funding? Maggie, did you really think I wouldn't notice when you liquidated a chunk of your trust in 2018? I'm the trustee, remember? I approved the transfer. I just didn't know where it went until my investigators traced it through 4 shell companies to an anonymous angel investor who gave Bradley Thornton the capital to expand from 12 trucks to 200. Maggie stared at the wall. She had been so careful, so meticulous about hiding her tracks. But Will had known the whole time. You never said anything. You never asked for help. Until now. Will's voice softened slightly. What do you need, Mags? Name it. Anything. I need a lawyer, Will. The best you have. Brad's hired Greg Sullivan. He's a local pit bull who wins by intimidating people and drowning them in legal fees. Brad thinks I'll just give up because I can't afford to fight him. Greg Sullivan, Will snorted. The guy's a clown who's never gone up against anyone with real resources. I'll have Victoria Chen Hawthorne on a plane to Chicago within the hour. Victoria Chen Hawthorne? The Victoria Chen Hawthorne? She owes me a favor. Several, actually. And she hates men who abuse their wives, almost as much as she hates losing. Will paused. But Maggie, I have to ask, what do you want out of this? Do you want a fair settlement? Do you want the house? The money? Maggie thought about it for a long moment. She thought about the check on the dining room table. She thought about Brad's smirk in the mirror. She thought about 25 years of watching him take credit for her ideas, dismiss her contributions, make her feel small and stupid and worthless. I want him to admit what he did, Will. I want him to stand up in a courtroom and admit that I built that company, that none of it would exist without me. I want him to know what it feels like to lose everything because someone decided he wasn't worth keeping around. So you want justice? I want the truth. Will was quiet for a moment. Then, Maggie, there's something you should know. The way the silent partner agreement was structured, the one you signed in 2018 when you funneled him that money, there's a clause. Section 14, paragraph B. We call it the bad faith clause. What does it do? It states that if the operating manager, Brad, ever denies the equity stake of the silent partner in the legal proceeding or commits perjury regarding the company's origins, the silent partnership protection is voided. Full control reverts to the majority shareholder. Maggie's heart was pounding. That's me. That's you. If we can get Brad to lie under oath about how the company was founded, and knowing Brad, he absolutely will, we don't just win the divorce, Mags. We take everything. The company, the accounts, the penthouse, everything he's stolen from you and claimed as his own." "He'll lie," Maggie said quietly. "He's been telling that story for so long, he probably believes it himself. The self-made man who built an empire from nothing." Then we let him tell that lie one more time, under oath, in front of a judge. Will's voice had a dark edge to it now. "And then we show the court exactly who built that empire, and who's been stealing the credit for 25 years. Maggie looked around the penthouse. The furniture she'd picked out, the art she'd chosen, the life she'd built with her own hands while Brad took all the glory. "How long?" she asked. "Victoria will need a few weeks to prepare. The forensic accountants will need time to trace the money trail. But Mags, when we walk into that courtroom, Brad Thornton won't know what hit him." "And what do I do until then?" "You leave. Tonight. Go somewhere he can't find you, can't pressure you, can't manipulate you. There's a suite at the Peninsula with your name on it. Or if you want to stay somewhere more private, I have a place in Lake Forest that's been empty for years. Your old room is still there, if you can believe it." Maggie felt tears streaming down her face. "You kept my room?" "Mom and Dad's house, Mags. I couldn't bring myself to change it. I always hoped you'd come back someday." His voice cracked slightly. "I missed you, little sister. Every day for 25 years, I missed you." "I missed you too, Will. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I didn't call. I just wanted—" "I know what you wanted. You wanted someone to love you for you, not for the money, not for the name." He sighed. "Did you find it? With him?" Maggie thought about Brad's face in the mirror tonight. The disgust, the dismissal, the complete lack of anything resembling love or respect. "No," she whispered. "I didn't find it. I thought I did for a while. But it was all a lie. He never loved me, Will. He loved the way I made him feel, like he was a king and I was his adoring subject. The moment I stopped being useful, he threw me away. Then we make him pay, Mags, not because we're petty, but because some people need to learn that actions have consequences. And Brad Thornton? He's about to get the education of his lifetime." Maggie wiped her eyes and stood up. She looked at the burner phone in her hand, then at the penthouse she was about to leave. "Tell Victoria I'll cooperate with whatever she needs. Tell your accountants I have records, 25 years of records. Every email, every spreadsheet, every late-night session where I figured out how to save the company money or land a new contract. Brad thought I was just helping with paperwork. He never realized I was documenting everything." Will laughed, and for the first time there was warmth in it. "That's my sister, always 3 steps ahead. I learned from the best. Get some sleep, Mags. Tomorrow, the war begins." Maggie hung up and looked around the penthouse one last time. The rain was still falling outside, streaking the windows like tears. She thought about packing. She thought about taking some of the things Brad said she couldn't have. The jewelry, the designer bags, the art she'd personally selected from galleries around the world. But in the end, she took nothing. Just the clothes on her back, her purse, and the burner phone. Let Brad think he'd won. Let him think she'd run away with her tail between her legs, defeated and broken. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that the nobody orphan from Nebraska was actually Margaret Eleanor Blackwood, heiress to one of the largest steel fortunes in the Midwest. He didn't know that her family's net worth made his precious $65 million company look like pocket change. And he definitely didn't know that in a few weeks, his entire world was about to come crashing down around him. Maggie took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman looked surprised to see her leaving so late, in the rain, without a car or an umbrella. "Mrs. Thornton? Are you all right? Should I call Mr. Thornton's driver?" "No, thank you, Marcus." Maggie smiled at him. It was the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. "And it's not Mrs. Thornton anymore. It's Blackwood. Margaret Blackwood." She walked out into the rain and didn't look back. 3 blocks away, a black car was already waiting for her. The window rolled down, and the woman's voice called out. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Dorothy Jennings. Your brother sent me. I've been the office manager at Thornton Distribution for 27 years, and I've been waiting a very long time to have this conversation with you." Maggie stopped in the rain, staring at the woman. "Dorothy? You work for Brad." "I work for the company you built." Dorothy pushed open the door. "Get in, honey. We have a lot to talk about. And I have 27 years of evidence that's going to put that lying son of a bitch exactly where he belongs." Maggie climbed into the car, and as it pulled away from Lakeshore Drive, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The car wound through Chicago's rain-slicked streets, while Maggie sat in stunned silence, staring at the woman beside her. Dorothy Jennings looked nothing like a corporate spy. She looked like somebody's grandmother, with silver hair pinned back in a practical bun and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. "You've been watching me," Maggie finally said. "All these years." "Watching you?" Dorothy laughed softly. "Honey, I've been covering for you. Every time Brad tried to take credit for something you did, I made sure there was a paper trail. Every email you sent, every spreadsheet you created, every contract you negotiated, I kept copies. 27 years of copies." "Why?" Dorothy's expression hardened. "Because I was there the day you walked into that office in 1999. I watched you transform a failing used car lot into a logistics empire. I saw you working 18-hour days while Brad played golf with clients and called it networking. And I watched him slowly erase you from the company's history, one lie at a time." Maggie's throat tightened. "I thought no one noticed." "I noticed." Dorothy reached over and squeezed her hand. "I noticed when he started introducing himself as the founder and sole owner at conferences. I noticed when he had your name removed from the company newsletter. I noticed when he stopped bringing you to investor meetings because Brittany photographed better." The name hit Maggie like a slap. "You know about Brittany?" "Everyone knows about Brittany, dear. She's not exactly subtle. Last month she posted a photo of Brad's car keys on Instagram with the caption, 'My man treats me right.' The Porsche keys. The Porsche you picked out for his 50th birthday." Maggie closed her eyes. The humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal. Everyone had known. Everyone had watched her husband parade his mistress around while she sat at home like an obedient fool. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Lake Forest, your brother's house. He's flying in tonight from New York." Dorothy glanced at her. "You know, he's been waiting for this call for 25 years. He never gave up on you, Maggie. Not once. He said he had people watching me." "He had me watching you," Dorothy smiled. "I was already working at Thornton Distribution when your brother reached out. He offered to triple my salary if I'd keep him informed about how you were doing. I would have done it for free, honestly. But the money helped put my grandkids through college." Maggie didn't know whether to feel touched or violated. Her entire life had been monitored without her knowledge. But then again, without that monitoring, she'd have no evidence, no ammunition, no hope. "The files you mentioned," Maggie said. "How much do you have?" "Everything." Dorothy's voice was firm. 27 years of emails, memos, financial records, and meeting notes. I have the original business plan you wrote in 2001, the one Brad presented to investors as his own. I have the negotiation transcripts from the Walmart deal, where you did all the talking while Brad sat there nodding. I have performance reviews where he rated you satisfactory, while privately telling the board you were essential to operations. He called me essential? To the board, yes. To your face, he called you a secretary who made good coffee. Dorothy's jaw tightened. I've wanted to expose him for years, Maggie, but I was waiting for you to be ready. I was waiting for you to fight back. I didn't think I could win. You couldn't, not alone. But you're not alone anymore. The Lake Forest estate was exactly as Maggie remembered it. The long driveway lined with oak trees, the Georgian mansion where she'd grown up, the gardens where her mother had taught her to plant roses. She hadn't been here in 25 years, but it felt like yesterday. A housekeeper met them at the door, not one Maggie recognized, and led them to the study, where a fire was already burning in the hearth. And there, standing by the window with a glass of scotch in his hand, was her brother. Will had aged. His hair was completely gray now, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But when he turned and saw her, his face transformed into the big brother she remembered from childhood. Mags. His voice broke on the single syllable. She ran to him. She hadn't planned to. She was a grown woman, for God's sake. But the moment she saw him, 25 years of distance collapsed into nothing. He caught her in his arms and held her tight. And for the first time since Brad had handed her those divorce papers, Maggie let herself cry. I'm sorry, she sobbed against his chest. I'm so sorry I left. I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm sorry. Stop. Will pulled back and held her face in his hands, looking at her with fierce tenderness. You have nothing to apologize for. You wanted to live your own life. You wanted to be loved for who you are. That's not a crime, Maggie. That's just being human. I should have known better. I should have seen what Brad really was. You saw what he wanted you to see. That's not your fault. That's his. Will's expression hardened. And he's going to pay for every lie, every insult, every moment he made you feel like you were less than what you are. He led her to a chair by the fire and handed her a glass of water. Dorothy settled into a corner with a thick folder of documents, already organizing papers for the battle ahead. Victoria lands at O'Hare in 3 hours, Will said. She's clearing her entire schedule for this case. When I told her what Brad Thornton did, offering you $5,000 after you funded his entire company, she laughed for about 30 seconds, and then she said, and I quote, "I'm going to enjoy this." Is she really as good as they say? Better. Will sat across from her. She's handled divorces for 3 Fortune 500 CEOs, 2 senators, and a member of the royal family of somewhere I'm not supposed to mention. Her win rate is 98%, and the 2% she lost were cases where her clients lied to her. She doesn't lose when she has the truth on her side. Brad's lawyer is Greg Sullivan. He's a bully. Will waved dismissively. He wins cases by intimidating people who can't afford to fight back. He's never gone up against anyone with unlimited resources and a personal vendetta. This isn't going to be a fight, Maggie. It's going to be an execution. Maggie stared into the fire. I don't want to destroy him, Will. I just want him to admit what he did. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Will leaned forward. Maggie, listen to me. Brad Thornton built his entire identity on a lie. He tells everyone he's a self-made man, a visionary who built an empire from nothing. When the world finds out that his nothing was actually $500,000 from his wife's trust fund, and that his vision was actually his wife's business plan, and that his empire was actually built by a woman he's now trying to throw out like garbage, that's not us destroying him. That's the truth destroying him. We're just making sure the truth gets told. There was a knock at the study door. The housekeeper appeared.
Mr. Blackwood, there's a woman here. She says her name is Victoria Chen Hawthorne.
Will smiled. Early, as usual. Send her in. Victoria was smaller than Maggie expected, maybe 5'3" in heels, with silver-streaked black hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the room in a single glance. She wore a red suit that probably cost more than Brad's car, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle in her life. Maggie Blackwood. Victoria crossed the room and shook her hand firmly. I've heard a lot about you. The silent investor who funded an empire and let her husband take all the credit. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I have to say, that took remarkable restraint. I would have exposed him about 15 years ago. I loved him, or I thought I did. Love makes us stupid. That's not a moral failing, it's just biology. Victoria settled into a chair and pulled out a tablet. Now, let's talk about how we're going to make Bradley Thornton wish he'd never been born. For the next 4 hours, they went through everything. The original investment documents that Maggie had routed through 3 shell companies to hide her identity. The silent partner agreement with its bad faith clause. The business plans she'd written that Brad had presented as his own. The contracts she'd negotiated. The crises she'd solved. The 25 years of evidence that Dorothy had been quietly collecting. By the time they finished, Victoria was smiling. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted the weakest gazelle in the herd. This is remarkable, Victoria said, scrolling through Dorothy's files on her tablet. I've never seen a case this comprehensive. You have documentation for virtually every major decision the company made over 25 years. And in almost every case, the paper trail leads back to Maggie. She looked up. How did Brad not notice this? He didn't look. Maggie's voice was tired. He never looked at the details. He was always focused on the big picture, the meetings, the presentations, the public image. The actual work was beneath him. His arrogance is going to be his downfall. Victoria closed the tablet. Here's the strategy. We're not going to show our hand early. The preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks. Sullivan will try to intimidate you, offer you a slightly higher settlement, and expect you to fold. You're going to look terrified. You're going to say nothing. You're going to let me handle everything. Why? Because we need Brad to commit perjury. Victoria's eyes gleamed. We need him to get on that stand in the actual trial and swear under oath that he built the company alone, that you contributed nothing, that the angel investor from 2018 was some mystery benefactor who believed in his genius. Once he lies to the court, and he will, because his entire identity depends on that lie, we invoke the bad faith clause. And then? Then we don't just win the divorce, we take the company. Victoria stood up. Brad Thornton offered you $5,000 and a bus ticket. By the time I'm done with him, he'll be lucky if he can afford the bus fare. Will walked Victoria to the door, while Dorothy and Maggie sat in silence by the fire. The clock on the mantel showed nearly midnight. It had been less than 12 hours since Brad had handed her those divorce papers, and already her entire world had shifted on its axis. You should sleep, Dorothy said gently. The next few weeks are going to be difficult. I can't sleep. My mind won't stop. Then let me tell you something that might help. Dorothy moved to sit closer to her. 3 years ago, Brad fired a young woman named Keisha Williams. She was the assistant logistics coordinator. Brilliant girl, just 24 years old. She caught some discrepancies in the shipping records and reported them to Brad directly. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that suggested someone was skimming money from the freight accounts. Brad fired her the same day, told everyone she was incompetent, had her escorted out by security. Dorothy paused. He was the one skimming Maggie, and Keisha knew it. Maggie felt ice form in her stomach. He's been stealing from the company? For at least 5 years, based on what I found. Small amounts at first, 10,000 here, 20,000 there, but it's added up. My best estimate is somewhere between $2 and $3 million, all funneled into personal accounts that aren't listed on any company records. Does Victoria know about this? She does now. Dorothy smiled grimly. I gave her everything tonight. The forensic accountants your brother hired are going to have a field day. This isn't just civil fraud, Maggie said slowly. This is criminal. It is, and when Brad gets on that stand and lies about being the sole owner of a company he's been embezzling from, a company that legally belongs to you, he won't just lose the business. Dorothy's voice hardened. He'll lose his freedom. Maggie stared at her. The woman she'd thought was just a kindly office manager had been playing a long game for 27 years. Why? Maggie asked. Why did you do all this for me? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a young woman in a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby. Beside her stood Maggie, 20 years younger, beaming at the camera. That's my daughter Sarah, Dorothy said. She was one of the first employees at Thornton Distribution. She got pregnant in 2004, and Brad wanted to fire her. Said she'd be too distracted to work. You went to bat for her, Maggie. You told Brad that if he fired her, you'd leave too. You got her 6 months of paid maternity leave and a promotion when she came back. Maggie remembered. It was one of the rare times she'd stood up to Brad, back when she still had some fight left in her. Sarah's still with the company, Dorothy continued. She's the regional operations director now, because of you. My grandchildren exist because you protected their mother's job when no one else would. She put the photo away. So when you ask why I've spent 27 years collecting evidence against Brad Thornton, that's why. Because you were kind to my daughter when you didn't have to be. And I don't forget kindness, Maggie. I pay it back. 2 weeks later, Maggie sat in a conference room at the Cook County Courthouse, wearing a plain gray dress she'd bought at a thrift store and no makeup. She'd lost weight from stress, and she looked exactly like what Sullivan expected to see. A beaten woman who knew she couldn't win. Across the table, Brad was practically glowing with confidence. He'd brought his expensive suit, his fake Rolex, and a smirk that made Maggie want to throw something at his head. Sullivan opened the proceedings with theatrical aggression. Let's cut to the chase, Ms. Hawthorne. He slammed a folder on the table. Your client has no legal standing here. Mr. Thornton built this company from the ground up with his own 2 hands. Mrs. Thornton, excuse me, Mrs. Hart, or whatever name she's using this week, was a housewife who occasionally helped with filing. We're prepared to increase our settlement offer to $10,000, which is frankly more than she deserves. Take the deal and let's stop wasting everyone's time. Victoria didn't even look up from her notes. We decline. You decline? Sullivan laughed. You decline $10,000? On what basis? On the basis that my client is entitled to substantially more. Your client is entitled to nothing. Brad leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. Maggie, look at me. Look at yourself. You're sitting there in a dress that probably cost $20, with a lawyer you can't afford, pretending you built something. But we both know the truth. I built Thornton Distribution. I worked the 80-hour weeks. I made the deals. I took the risks. You sat at home and knitted. Maggie felt Victoria's hand on her arm. A warning. Don't respond. I tried to help you, Brad continued, warming to his performance. I really did. I let you come to the office sometimes. I let you answer phones, greet clients, do the little wifely things that made you feel useful. But let's be honest, Maggie. You don't have a head for business. You never did. You're a simple girl from Nebraska who got lucky when I married her. And now you want to steal half my company because your feelings got hurt? Victoria finally looked up. Are you finished, Mr. Thornton? I'm just getting started. Brad's eyes were cold. Let me be clear about something. If you fight me on this, I will destroy her. I will hire private investigators to dig up every secret she's ever had. I will drag her name through the mud in every newspaper in Chicago. I will make sure she can't get a job scrubbing toilets by the time I'm done. Take the 10,000, Maggie. It's the last act of kindness I'll ever show you. The room was silent. Sullivan looked satisfied. Brad looked triumphant. Victoria closed her folder and smiled. Your Honor wasn't supposed to be present at this mediation, but I'm going to request a change. She stood up. We reject the settlement. We reject any future settlement. We will see Mr. Thornton in open court in 3 weeks. She paused at the door. And Mr. Thornton? I'd advise you to enjoy these next 3 weeks. They'll be the last comfortable ones you'll have for a very long time. She walked out. Maggie followed, not looking back. In the hallway, Victoria's composure cracked into a genuine grin. He's perfect, she said. Absolutely perfect. Did you hear him? I built this company with my own 2 hands. You don't have a head for business. He's going to say the exact same things under oath, and then we're going to bury him with the evidence. He threatened me, Maggie said quietly. He said he'd destroy my reputation. Let him try. Victoria's eyes were fierce. Your reputation is what? A devoted wife who funded her husband's dreams and got discarded for a 27-year-old fitness influencer? The public is going to love you, Maggie. You're every woman who ever gave everything to a man who gave nothing back. By the time this trial is over, Brad Thornton won't be able to show his face in this city. That night, Maggie sat alone in her room at the Lake Forest mansion, staring at her phone. There was a text from an unknown number. Heard you rejected the settlement. Big mistake. Last chance to walk away with something. Brittany and I are looking at houses in Naples. Need this wrapped up. Don't be pathetic. She showed the message to Victoria the next morning. Victoria read it and laughed. Naples, how lovely. I believe your family owns property there, don't they? 3 villas. My grandmother left them to me. Perfect. Victoria screenshot the message. Evidence of harassment during legal proceedings. That's going to look wonderful in front of the judge. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Victoria's team worked around the clock, organizing evidence, preparing witnesses, and building a case so airtight that even the best defense couldn't penetrate it. Dorothy was deposed. Keisha Williams, the woman Brad had fired for discovering his embezzlement, agreed to testify. 3 former employees came forward with stories of Brad taking credit for their work, just as he'd done to Maggie. And then there was the financial evidence. The forensic accountants had traced every penny of the original $500,000 investment, from Maggie's trust fund through 4 shell companies to Brad's business accounts. They'd documented the embezzlement scheme Dorothy had discovered. They'd even found evidence that Brad had been hiding assets in offshore accounts, assets that legally belonged to Maggie as the majority shareholder. The night before the trial, Will came to Maggie's room. You don't have to do this, he said. We could settle. Take the company, take the money, and walk away. You never have to see him again. Maggie shook her head. If I do that, he'll still tell everyone he built that company. He'll still believe he's a self-made man who got robbed by his vindictive ex-wife. He'll learn nothing. He'll change nothing. So this is about teaching him a lesson? This is about the truth. Maggie looked at her brother.
For 25 years, I let him lie about who built that company. I let him take credit for my work because I thought it didn't matter. Because I thought love was more important than recognition. She paused. I was wrong. The truth matters. And tomorrow, everyone is going to hear it. Will hugged her. You know, Dad would be proud of you. Dad would have had Brad killed and dumped in Lake Michigan. That was my first suggestion, actually. Victoria talked me out of it. Maggie laughed for the first time in weeks. It felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Brad Thornton would learn what it felt like to lose everything. And tomorrow, Margaret Eleanor Blackwood would finally stop hiding. The Cook County Courthouse had seen plenty of dramatic trials over the years. Mobsters, politicians, corporate titans, they'd all walk through these halls on their way to judgment. But Judge Patricia Moreno had never seen anything quite like what was about to unfold in her courtroom. Maggie arrived early, wearing the same plain gray dress from the mediation. Victoria had insisted on it. Let them underestimate you, she'd said. Let Brad see the woman he thinks he married. The reveal will be so much sweeter. Will was already seated in the gallery, flanked by two lawyers from Blackwood Steel's legal team. Dorothy sat behind them, clutching a folder thick with 27 years of evidence. The courtroom was otherwise empty. This was a civil proceeding, not a criminal trial, so there were no reporters, no cameras, no public audience. That would change soon enough. Brad walked in like he owned the building. He'd worn his best suit, a charcoal Armani that Maggie had picked out for him 3 years ago. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his fake Rolex gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Sullivan walked beside him, equally confident. They'd spent the past 3 weeks preparing Brad's testimony, coaching him on exactly what to say and how to say it. They had no idea what was coming. Brad glanced at Maggie as he passed her table. He actually winked. "Nice dress," he whispered. "Goodwill?" Maggie said nothing. Victoria's hand pressed gently against her arm. Wait. Judge Moreno entered, and everyone rose. She was a stern woman in her late 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She had a reputation for fairness, efficiency, and absolutely zero tolerance for lawyers who wasted her time. "Be seated," she commanded. "We're here for the matter of Thornton versus Thornton. Mr. Sullivan, I understand you're representing the petitioner?" "Yes, Your Honor." Sullivan stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "My client, Bradley Thornton, is seeking a dissolution of his marriage to Margaret Thornton, along with a full accounting of marital assets and confirmation of his sole ownership of Thornton Distribution Incorporated." "And Ms. Chen Hawthorne, you're representing the respondent?" "I am, Your Honor." Victoria's voice was calm, almost bored. "We're contesting the petitioner's characterization of both the marriage and the business ownership." "Very well. Mr. Sullivan, your opening statement." Sullivan launched into his prepared speech with theatrical flair. Maggie had heard it all before. The self-made man, the visionary entrepreneur, the devoted husband who'd lifted a poor orphan girl from nothing and given her a life of luxury. By the time he finished, Brad was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. "Ms. Chen Hawthorne?" Judge Moreno looked at Victoria expectantly. Victoria stood slowly. She didn't approach the podium. She didn't pick up any notes. She simply looked at Brad for a long, uncomfortable moment, then turned to the judge. "We reserve our opening statement for later, Your Honor. We prefer to let the facts speak for themselves." Sullivan's confident smile faltered slightly. That wasn't normal procedure. But Judge Moreno simply nodded. "Very well. Mr. Sullivan, call your first witness." The petitioner calls Bradley Mitchell Thornton to the stand. Brad walked to the witness stand like a man accepting an award. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth,
and settled into the chair with an air of complete confidence. Sullivan began the examination with practiced ease. "Mr. Thornton, please tell the court about the founding of Thornton Distribution." Brad sighed, adopting an expression of humble reflection. "It was 1998. I was working 3 jobs, saving every penny I could. I had a dream of starting my own business, something that would really make a difference in the logistics industry. I took $50,000 of my own savings and bought my first delivery van." "From your own savings?" Sullivan emphasized. "No outside help?" "Not a dime," Brad shook his head. "I drove that van myself for 2 years, did deliveries during the day, cold called potential clients at night, ate ramen noodles, and slept 4 hours a night. It was blood, sweat, and tears, but I built something real." Maggie felt her fingernails digging into her palms. Every word was a lie. She'd been there in 1998. She remembered the exact moment Brad had come to her, desperate, saying his car dealership boss was about to fire him, and he had no prospects and no money. She remembered writing the check. "And when did you meet your wife?" Sullivan continued. "Around that time. Maggie was working as a temp at a company down the street from my first office. She was sweet, simple, a small-town girl from Nebraska. She'd had a rough childhood. Orphan, foster care, never finished college. I felt sorry for her, honestly. I wanted to give her a better life." "And what role did she play in your business?" "Minimal, I'm afraid." Brad shook his head sadly. "I tried to involve her. I really did. I asked her to help with filing, answering phones, that sort of thing. But she just didn't have the head for business. She was happier at home, knitting, watching television. I never pushed her to be something she wasn't." "So to be absolutely clear, Mr. Thornton, did your wife contribute any financial capital to the founding or operation of Thornton Distribution?" "None whatsoever." Brad's voice was firm. "Maggie didn't have any money to contribute. She came from nothing. Everything we have, the company, the penthouse, the cars, I built it all myself." "And her involvement in company operations?" "Like I said, she occasionally helped with basic tasks, filing paperwork, making coffee when clients visited, that sort of thing. But the real work, the strategy, the contracts, the vision, that was all me." Sullivan nodded with satisfaction. "No further questions." Victoria stood up slowly. She didn't approach the witness stand. She stayed behind her table, watching Brad with an expression that reminded Maggie of a cat watching a mouse. "Mr. Thornton," Victoria began, her voice conversational, almost friendly. "You stated that you used $50,000 of your personal savings to start your company in 1998. Which bank held those savings?" Brad blinked. "Excuse me?" "Simple question. Where was the money? Checking account? Savings account? Which bank?" I kept it in cash, mostly. Tips from my previous jobs. I didn't trust banks back then." "Cash," Victoria nodded. "So there's no paper trail for this original investment?" "I was a young entrepreneur. I wasn't thinking about paper trails." "I see. And this $50,000 in cash, where did you keep it? Under your mattress? In a safe?" "I had a safe in my apartment. And when you purchased your first delivery van, you paid in cash from this safe?" "That's correct." Victoria picked up a document from her table. "I have here the bill of sale for a 1997 Ford Econoline van, purchased on March 15, 1999, from Chicago Auto Sales. The payment method listed is certified check. Would you like to revise your testimony about paying in cash?" Brad's face reddened. I must have gotten a certified check from the cash. That's what you do when you're buying a vehicle." "Of course. And the bank that issued this certified check?" "I don't remember. It was almost 30 years ago." "It was First National Bank of Chicago." Victoria set the document down. "I've obtained records from their archives. The certified check was drawn on an account belonging to Margaret Hart, your future wife. The courtroom went silent. Brad's confident expression flickered. That's wrong. Maggie didn't have any money. She was a temp worker making minimum wage. Was she? Victoria picked up another document. I have here the tax returns for Margaret Hart from 1998. Her declared income that year was $427,000. Would you like to explain how a minimum wage temp worker earned nearly $500,000? That's impossible. Brad was sweating now. She must have lied on her taxes. Are you accusing my client of tax fraud, Mr. Thornton? I'm saying those documents are fake. They're certified copies from the IRS, obtained through proper legal channels. Victoria set them aside. Let's move on. You mentioned that your wife had no head for business, that she was happier at home. Are you familiar with a Walmart distribution contract that Thornton Distribution signed in 2015? Brad straightened in his chair, grateful for the change of subject. Of course. That was my biggest achievement. I personally negotiated that deal over 6 months of meetings. Really? Victoria picked up a thick folder. I have here the complete transcript of those negotiations, obtained through discovery. The primary negotiator for Thornton Distribution is listed as, let me see, M. Thornton. She looked up. Not B. Thornton, M. Thornton. Your wife's initial, isn't it? That's a typo, obviously. A typo that appears in 47 separate documents across 6 months of negotiations? Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. I also have affidavits from 3 Walmart executives who were present at those negotiations. Victoria held up more papers. They all state under oath that they dealt primarily with Mrs. Thornton. One of them describes you as the silent partner who mostly nodded along. Sullivan jumped to his feet. Objection. This is character assassination. The negotiations are irrelevant to the matter of asset division. On the contrary, Victoria replied calmly, the petitioner has testified under oath that his wife contributed nothing to the business. I'm simply presenting evidence that contradicts that testimony. Overruled. Judge Moreno's eyes were fixed on Brad. The witness will answer the questions. Victoria continued, relentless. Mr. Thornton, let's discuss the angel investor. In 2018, your company received a $500,000 investment from an entity called Blue Horizon Ventures, characterized as an anonymous angel investor. Do you recall this investment? Brad's face had gone pale. Yes, it was a venture capital firm. They believed in my vision. Did you ever meet anyone from Blue Horizon Ventures? No, they preferred to remain anonymous. Silent partners. Silent partners, Victoria smiled. Are you familiar with the concept of a bad faith clause in a silent partner agreement? Sullivan was on his feet again. Objection! What does this have to do with anything? Your Honor, I'm establishing the legal framework for our counterclaim. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Chen Hawthorne. The investment from Blue Horizon Ventures came with a silent partner agreement, standard document for anonymous investors. But there's a specific clause, Section 14, Paragraph B, that states if the operating manager ever denies the equity stake of the silent partner in a legal proceeding or commits perjury regarding the company's origins, the partnership protection is voided and full control reverts to the majority shareholder. Brad stared at her. What does that have to do with anything? Mr. Thornton, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Did your wife, Margaret Thornton, contribute any financial capital to Thornton Distribution? Brad looked at Sullivan. Sullivan gave a tiny nod. Stick to the story. No. Brad's voice was firm. My wife did not contribute a single cent to my company. Victoria nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Your Honor, the defense calls its first and only witness. We call William Alexander Blackwood to the stand. The name fell into the courtroom like a bomb. Brad's head snapped toward the gallery. He watched as a tall man in a $3,000 suit stood up and walked toward the witness stand. The man moved with the confidence of someone who owned half the buildings in Chicago. Because he did. Blackwood, Brad whispered. The Blackwood Steel guy? What the hell is he doing here? Sullivan was flipping frantically through his notes. This wasn't in the witness list. He was added yesterday, Mr. Sullivan. Victoria's voice was pleasant. Your office was notified. Will took the stand and swore the oath. His eyes never left Brad's face. Please state your full name and occupation for the record, Victoria said. William Alexander Blackwood IV. I'm the CEO and chairman of Blackwood Steel Corporation and the primary trustee of the Blackwood family estate. Mr. Blackwood, do you know the respondent in this case, Margaret Thornton? Will's expression softened as he looked at Maggie. I do. She's my sister. Brad made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Your sister. Victoria let the word hang in the air. Could you explain that relationship to the court? Maggie is my younger sister. She was born Margaret Eleanor Blackwood in 1972. She left the family in 1999 to live independently, using our mother's maiden name, Hart. She wanted to build a life without the Blackwood name following her. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what she was worth. Brad was shaking his head. No, this is insane. She's an orphan. She told me she grew up in foster care in Nebraska. She told me... Mr. Thornton, you are not on the stand. Judge Moreno's voice cut through his protests. You will remain silent until counsel addresses you, Victoria continued. Mr. Blackwood, are you familiar with a company called Thornton Distribution? Intimately. Will's voice hardened. In 2018, my sister petitioned the family trust to release $500,000 of her personal assets. She instructed us to route the money through a venture capital firm called Blue Horizon Ventures to her husband's business. She wanted to help him expand without him knowing the money came from her. Why did she want to remain anonymous? Because she loved him. Will's eyes were cold as he looked at Brad. She thought he'd be embarrassed if he knew his wife was bankrolling his dreams. She wanted him to feel like a success. She wanted him to have pride in what they were building together. And what did the silent partner agreement establish regarding ownership? The $500,000 represented a 90% equity stake in Thornton Distribution. The agreement established my sister as the majority shareholder, with Bradley Thornton as the operating manager. Victoria picked up a thick leather folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the complete documentation of this investment. Bank transfer records, the silent partner agreement, email authorizations, and forensic accounting analysis tracing every penny from the Blackwood Family Trust to Thornton Distribution. Judge Moreno accepted the folder and began flipping through it. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. This documentation, Victoria continued, proves that virtually every major asset of Thornton Distribution, the trucks, the warehouses, the software systems, even the office furniture, can be traced back to capital provided by Margaret Blackwood Thornton. Legally, Mr. Thornton doesn't own a company. He's an employee who has just committed perjury by denying his wife's investment under oath. Brad stood up. His face was purple with rage. This is a setup. She lied to me for 25 years. She pretended to be some poor orphan girl when she was actually... Sit down, Mr. Thornton. Judge Moreno's voice was ice. I won't sit down. This is fraud. She married me under false pretenses. Mr. Thornton. The judge's gavel cracked against the bench.
You will control yourself or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Sit down. Now." Sullivan grabbed Brad's arm and forced him back into his chair. Brad was breathing hard, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Victoria wasn't finished. "Mr. Blackwood, there's one more matter we need to address. Are you aware of any irregularities in the financial management of Thornton Distribution?" "I am." Will's voice was grim. "Our forensic accountants have identified approximately $2.8 million in unauthorized transfers from company accounts to personal accounts belonging to Bradley Thornton over the past 5 years." "Embezzlement?" "Yes. Money that legally belongs to my sister as the majority shareholder." Brad's lawyer was on his feet. "Objection! These accusations are outrageous. My client has never—" "We have the records, Mr. Sullivan." Victoria's voice cut through his protests. "Every transfer, every fake invoice, every offshore account Mr. Thornton thought no one would find." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we're not just contesting the divorce settlement. We're requesting an immediate injunction freezing all of Mr. Thornton's assets pending criminal investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and perjury." Judge Moreno stared at the documents in front of her. She looked at Brad, whose confident smirk had been replaced by naked terror. She looked at Sullivan, who seemed to be calculating how quickly he could distance himself from his client. Then she looked at Maggie. "Mrs. Thornton," the judge said quietly, "is there anything you'd like to say?" Maggie stood slowly. She'd been silent throughout the entire trial, just as Victoria had instructed. But now, finally, she had permission to speak. 25 years ago, Maggie said, her voice steady, I walked away from everything I knew because I wanted to find out if someone could love me for who I am. Not for my family's money, not for the Blackwood name, just for me. She looked at Brad. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. I thought Brad was that person. When I met him, he was struggling, ambitious, full of dreams he couldn't afford to chase. I believed in him. I loved him. I gave him everything I had, not just money, but my time, my energy, my ideas, my heart. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. I wrote the business plan he presented to investors. I negotiated the contracts he took credit for. I solved the problems he didn't even know existed. I did it all quietly, in the background, because I thought that's what a good wife did. I thought if I just kept supporting him, kept believing in him, he would eventually see my value. She paused, collecting herself. Instead, he decided I was worthless. He decided 25 years of partnership could be erased with a $5,000 check and a bus ticket. He decided I was nothing more than a secretary who made coffee. Maggie looked directly at Brad. You were wrong, Brad, about everything. And now you know. She sat down. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of Brad's ragged breathing. Judge Moreno removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she looked up, her expression was one of barely contained fury. In my 30 years on the bench, she said slowly, I have seen a great many cases of marital fraud. I have seen husbands hide assets from wives, wives deceive husbands, partners betray partners in countless creative ways. But I have never seen anything quite like this. She pointed at Brad. You sat in that chair and swore an oath to tell the truth. You then proceeded to spin an elaborate fantasy about a self-made empire built from nothing, while your wife, the woman who actually funded your business, wrote your plans, negotiated your contracts, and built your success, sat silently and let you lie. She picked up her gavel. Mr. Thornton, I am granting the defense's motion in full. I am issuing an immediate injunction freezing all of your assets pending criminal investigation. I am declaring the silent partner agreement valid and enforceable.
which means that under Section 14, Paragraph B, the bad faith clause you apparently never bothered to read, full ownership of Thornton Distribution reverts to Margaret Blackwood Thornton, effective immediately. She brought the gavel down hard. You came into this courtroom thinking you would walk out with everything. Instead, you will walk out with nothing.
The penthouse, the cars, the accounts, all purchased with company funds that legally belong to your wife. You will vacate the premises within 24 hours. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Everything else stays. Brad stood up, his legs shaking. You can't do this. I'll appeal. You can try. Judge Moreno's voice was ice. But I should warn you, Mr. Thornton. The transcripts from today's proceedings will be forwarded to the district attorney's office. Perjury is a criminal offense. So is embezzlement. I suggest you focus less on appealing my decision and more on finding a very good criminal defense attorney. She stood up. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time, and Brad Thornton's empire shattered into a million pieces. The gavel's echo hadn't even faded before Greg Sullivan was shoving papers into his briefcase. His hands were shaking so badly that documents scattered across the table. Greg. Brad grabbed his arm. Greg, wait. We can appeal. There has to be something. Don't touch me. Sullivan yanked his arm free. Don't call me. Don't email me. Don't ever speak my name again. He lowered his voice to a vicious hiss. You told me she was a nobody. You told me she had nothing. You made me look like a fool in front of Patricia Moreno. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my reputation? Your reputation? What about mine? Sullivan laughed, a short, ugly sound. Your reputation. Brad, you just committed perjury in open court. You admitted to embezzling millions of dollars. Your reputation isn't damaged. It's dead. He snapped his briefcase shut. Find another lawyer. I'm done. He practically ran out of the courtroom, leaving Brad standing alone at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Victoria was calmly gathering her documents, while Will helped Maggie to her feet. Dorothy had tears streaming down her face, clutching her folder of evidence like a trophy. Maggie, Brad's voice cracked. Maggie, please, we need to talk. Will stepped between them. You don't get to talk to her. Not now, not ever. This is between me and my wife. Ex-wife. Victoria didn't look up from her papers. The divorce was finalized the moment the judge ruled. You have no legal relationship to Mrs. Blackwood anymore. Blackwood. Brad spat the name like it was poison. She lied to me for 25 years. She pretended to be someone she wasn't. She trapped me into a marriage based on fraud. Fraud? Maggie finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the courtroom like a knife. I gave you everything, Brad. I gave you money. I gave you ideas. I gave you a business. The only thing I didn't give you was my last name. And you're calling that fraud? You should have told me who you were. Why? So you could spend my inheritance instead of the money I chose to give you? Maggie shook her head slowly. I know you, Brad. I've known you for 25 years. If you'd found out I was a Blackwood, you would have treated me like an ATM instead of a wife. The result would have been the same, just faster. Brad's face contorted with rage. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You and your fancy family and your billions of dollars. You looked down on me from day one. No, I didn't. Maggie's eyes were sad. I loved you, Brad. I really did. I thought you were ambitious and driven and full of potential. I wanted to help you succeed. I wanted to build something with you. She paused. But somewhere along the way, you decided my help was worthless. You decided I was worthless. That wasn't my doing. That was yours. Brad opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in 25 years, he had no comeback.
No clever retort. No way to spin this into a victory. Will took Maggie's arm gently. We should go. Victoria has paperwork to file, and you need to rest. Maggie nodded. She started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. Brad, there's one more thing you should know. He looked at her, desperate for any scrap of hope. The Rolex. Maggie pointed at his wrist. The one you've been showing off for 15 years? The one you told everyone cost $40,000? Brad instinctively covered the watch with his other hand. I bought it on Canal Street in New York for $200. Maggie's lips curved into a sad smile. It's fake, Brad. Just like everything else about the life you claimed you built. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Brad stood frozen, staring at the watch on his wrist. The gold band that had gleamed so impressively under boardroom lights. The designer logo he'd bragged about to clients and competitors alike. Fake. A $200 knockoff from a street vendor. He ripped it off his wrist and hurled it against the wall. The cheap metal cracked on impact, pieces scattering across the marble floor. Sir, the bailiff's voice was cold. You need to leave the courtroom. Brad looked around. The room was empty except for the bailiff and a cleaning crew waiting to prepare for the next case. His lawyer was gone. His wife, ex-wife, was gone. His entire life was gone. He walked out of the courthouse on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The sunlight was blinding after the dim interior, and he fumbled for his phone to call a car. That's when he saw the notifications. 17 missed calls from the office. 43 text messages. 200 emails. He opened the first text. It was from his CFO. Brad, what the hell is happening? Someone just walked in with a court order and changed all the locks. They're saying Maggie owns the company? Call me immediately. The second text was from his COO. The forensic accountants are here. They're going through everything. Everything. You need to call a lawyer, not Sullivan. A criminal lawyer. The third text was from his assistant. Mr. Thornton, security won't let me access your office. They said you've been terminated. What should I do with your personal belongings? Brad's hands were shaking so badly he could barely scroll. Text after text, email after email, each one worse than the last. His empire was crumbling in real time, and he was standing on a courthouse steps watching it happen. His phone buzzed again. A new text from a number he didn't recognize. Saw the news about your company. Sucks to be you. Don't call me. B. Brittany. She was already gone. He tried calling her anyway. The phone rang once and went to voicemail. He tried again. This time it didn't ring at all. She'd blocked him. Brad sat down heavily on the courthouse steps. Around him, people flowed past. Lawyers, plaintiffs, defendants, all absorbed in their own dramas. Nobody looked twice at the man in the expensive suit having a breakdown on the concrete. His phone rang. This time, he answered without looking. Mr. Thornton? An unfamiliar voice. This is Detective Marcus Webb with the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about certain transactions at Thornton Distribution. Brad closed his eyes. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but I'd strongly advise you to cooperate. And Mr. Thornton? You might want to bring a lawyer. The line went dead. Brad sat there for a long time, watching the clouds roll across the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in this city, Maggie was probably celebrating with her brother. Somewhere, Victoria Chen Hawthorne was filing paperwork that would complete his destruction. Somewhere, Brittany was already scrolling through her contacts, looking for the next wealthy man to attach herself to. And he was alone. Completely, utterly alone. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number.
Hey, Brad, it's Keisha Williams. Remember me? The girl you fired for finding out you were stealing? Just wanted to say, karma's a bitch, isn't it? He threw the phone across the steps. It shattered against the stone, pieces flying everywhere. A security guard approached him. Sir, you can't sit here. You need to move along. Brad looked up at him. Do you know who I am? The guard shrugged. Don't know, don't care. Move along or I'll call the police. Brad laughed. It came out as something closer to a sob. The police are already waiting for me. He stood up, brushed off his expensive suit, the suit his wife had picked out, the suit he couldn't afford anymore, and started walking. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stand still. 3 blocks away, Maggie sat in the back of Will's car, watching the city slide past through tinted windows. She felt empty. Not victorious, not relieved, just hollow. You did the right thing. Will's voice was gentle. You know that, right? Did I? Maggie stared at her hands. I destroyed him, Will. 25 years of his life wiped out in an afternoon. He destroyed himself. You just held up a mirror. A mirror that showed the whole world what a fraud he was. Maggie shook her head. I kept telling myself this was about justice, about the truth. But part of me wanted him to hurt, wanted him to feel what I felt when he handed me that check and told me I was worthless. That's human, Mags. Is it? Or is it just petty revenge dressed up as righteousness? Victoria, sitting in the front seat, turned around. May I say something? Maggie nodded. I've handled a lot of divorces in my career. Ugly ones, complicated ones. Cases where both parties were monsters and cases where one party was a clear victim. Victoria's dark eyes were serious. What Brad Thornton did to you wasn't just about money or credit. It was about erasure. He systematically removed you from the narrative of your own life. He made you invisible. I let him do it. You trusted him. That's different. Victoria shook her head. What happened in that courtroom today wasn't revenge, Maggie. It was correction. You didn't destroy Brad Thornton. You simply stopped allowing him to pretend he was something he wasn't. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens now? Now? Victoria pulled out her tablet. Now we rebuild. Thornton Distribution is legally yours. You can sell it, restructure it, or run it yourself. The forensic accountants are already working to recover the money Brad embezzled. The criminal investigation will proceed independently of us. I don't want to run his company. It's not his company. It never was. Will reached over and took her hand. It's your company, Mags. Built with your money, your plans, your vision. Whatever you decide to do with it, it belongs to you. Maggie thought about the early days. The cramped office in Cicero. The delivery van she'd driven herself when their first 2 drivers quit the same week. The late nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to figure out how to make payroll. She'd loved that work. She'd loved building something from nothing, or what she'd pretended was nothing. Dorothy, Maggie said suddenly. Is she still with the company? Yes, she's been there all day, helping the transition team. I want to talk to her. I want to talk to all the employees. Maggie sat up straighter. If I'm going to own this company, they deserve to hear it from me. They deserve to know what really happened. Victoria smiled. That can be arranged. And Victoria, I want you to find Keisha Williams, the woman Brad fired for discovering his embezzlement. We've already located her. She's working at a warehouse in Joliet, making $12 an hour. Offer her a job, whatever position she wants, and back pay for the 3 years since Brad wrongfully terminated her. Victoria's smile widened. I'll make the call tonight. The car pulled up to the Lake Forest estate. Maggie stepped out into the evening air, feeling the weight of the day settling onto her shoulders. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and completely uncertain about what came next. But for the first time in 25 years, she was free. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Marcus Webb with Chicago PD. We'd like to speak with you about your husband's financial activities. Please call at your earliest convenience." Maggie stared at the message. Then she typed a reply. "It's Mrs. Blackwood, and I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow." She silenced her phone and walked into the house where she'd grown up, the house she'd abandoned a quarter-century ago because she wanted to find out who she was without the Blackwood name attached. The house she'd returned to because the man she loved had tried to throw her away like garbage. Will was waiting for her in the foyer. "The staff has prepared your old room. Same wallpaper, same furniture. Mom never let anyone change it." Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. "She always hoped I'd come back." "We all did." Will hugged her tightly. "Welcome home, Mags." 3 hours later, Maggie sat alone in her childhood bedroom, staring at a photograph she'd found in her old desk drawer. It showed her and Will at ages 8 and 14, building sandcastles on the beach at Martha's Vineyard. Their parents stood behind them, smiling at something off-camera. They were all gone now. Mom to cancer in 2010. Dad to a heart attack in 2009. Only she and Will remained. She'd missed both funerals. She'd been too afraid to come back, too committed to her fake identity as Maggie Hart from Nebraska. Brad had mentioned seeing the obituaries in the Wall Street Journal, had commented on how sad it was that these billionaires had died. He'd never connected the dots. He'd never realized his wife was crying in the bathroom because her mother was being buried 300 miles away. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Dorothy entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might need this." Maggie accepted the cup gratefully. "You should go home, Dorothy. It's nearly midnight." "Home can wait." Dorothy sat in the armchair by the window. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I don't know what I am." Maggie set the photograph aside. 25 years of my life just imploded. My husband is probably going to prison. I own a company I never asked for, and I'm sitting in a bedroom I haven't seen since Bill Clinton was president. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot. Maggie laughed weakly. This morning, I was planning to sign divorce papers and disappear. Now I'm a CEO with 200 employees and a criminal investigation to cooperate with. For what it's worth, Dorothy said carefully, those 200 employees are thrilled. Word spread fast after the court ruling. Most of them have known for years that you were the real brains behind the operation. They just couldn't say anything while Brad was in charge. They knew? Of course they knew. You think people don't notice when the boss takes 3-hour lunch meetings while his wife stays late solving actual problems? Dorothy shook her head. The good employees knew, the ones who paid attention. They've been waiting for this day almost as long as I have. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then, Dorothy, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you stay? All those years, watching Brad take credit for everything, watching him treat people like dirt. Why didn't you just quit? Dorothy considered the question. Because of you. Because 23 years ago, you saved my daughter's job when Brad wanted to fire her for getting pregnant. You fought for her. You got her maternity leave and a promotion. Sarah's still with the company because of you. I remember that. Brad was furious. He got over it when she turned out to be the best regional manager he'd ever had. Dorothy smiled. But I didn't forget. I stayed because I knew someday, somehow, the truth would come out.
and I wanted to be there when it did. What if it hadn't? What if Brad and I had just stayed married forever? What if he'd never tried to throw me out? Dorothy's expression grew serious. Then I would have gone to my grave keeping your secrets. Because that's what loyal people do. But I always knew it would end this way.
Men like Brad, they can't help themselves. They always overreach. They always get caught. She paused. The only question was whether you'd fight back or let him win. I almost let him win. But you didn't. Dorothy reached over and squeezed her hand. And that's what matters. Maggie's phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. Maggie, it's Brad. I'm using a friend's phone because mine broke. Please, I'm begging you. We need to talk. I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things. But we can work this out. I love you. I've always loved you. Please don't do this to me. Maggie stared at the message for a long time. Dorothy read it over her shoulder. What are you going to do? What I should have done 25 years ago. Maggie typed a 2-word reply and hit send. Goodbye, Brad. Then she blocked the number and set the phone face down on the nightstand. There, she said quietly. It's over. But even as she said the words, she knew they weren't quite true. The divorce was final. The company was hers. Brad's downfall was complete. But the hardest part was still ahead. She had to figure out who Margaret Blackwood was now. Not the society heiress she'd been born as. Not the invisible wife she'd pretended to be. But something new. Something real. Something entirely her own. Dorothy, Maggie said suddenly, tomorrow morning, I want to visit the company. All the locations. I want to meet every single employee and tell them who I am and what really happened. That's a lot of people. 200 employees across 6 facilities. I know, but they deserve the truth. They deserve to know who they've really been working for all these years. Maggie stood up and walked to the window. The lights of Chicago glittered in the distance. And I deserve to finally stop hiding. Dorothy rose and gathered the teacups. I'll arrange everything. 7 a.m.? Make it 6. I've wasted enough time pretending to be someone I'm not. Dorothy paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mrs. Blackwood, I think you're going to be an excellent CEO. Maggie smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd felt since this whole nightmare began. Call me Maggie, she said. After 27 years, I think we're past formalities. Dorothy grinned. Good night, Maggie. Good night, Dorothy. The door clicked shut, and Maggie was alone with the photograph of her childhood and the distant lights of a city where her whole life was about to change. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows of the old mansion. A storm was coming. Maggie could feel it in the air, that electric tension that preceded something big. But she wasn't afraid of storms anymore. She'd just survived the biggest one of her life, and she was still standing. 6 o'clock came faster than Maggie expected. She'd barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the courtroom scene. Brad's face when Will took the stand. The sound of the gavel sealing her freedom. But when Dorothy knocked on her door at 5:30, she was already dressed and ready. There's been a development, Dorothy said, her expression unreadable. You need to see the news. They hurried down to Will's study, where a massive television was already tuned to a Chicago morning show. The anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news in the Chicago business community. Bradley Thornton, founder and CEO of Thornton Distribution, was arrested early this morning at his Lakeshore Drive penthouse on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and perjury. Sources close to the investigation say the charges stem from a dramatic courtroom revelation yesterday, in which Thornton's wife of 25 years was revealed to be Margaret Blackwood, heiress to the Blackwood steel fortune.
Maggie sank into a chair.
They arrested him already? The evidence was overwhelming, Victoria said, entering the study with a cup of coffee. The forensic accountants worked through the night. They found another offshore account Brad didn't know we knew about. Cayman Islands. Another $1.2 million. $4 million total, Maggie shook her head. He was stealing $4 million from a company I funded? From a company you own, Victoria sat beside her. The DA moved fast because they were worried he'd flee. His passport was seized at 6 this morning. Will muted the television. There's something else, Mags. Something the news doesn't know yet. What? Brittany Parker. Will's jaw tightened. Turns out she wasn't just Brad's mistress. She was his accomplice. Maggie stared at him. What are you talking about? The forensic accountants found wire transfers from Brad's offshore accounts to Brittany's personal accounts. Over $300,000 in the past 18 months. Will handed her a printout. She wasn't just dating him. She was helping him hide money. She knew? Maggie felt sick. She knew about the embezzlement? She helped plan it. We found emails. Apparently, the whole fitness influencer thing was a front. She was running a scheme where she'd target wealthy married men, get them to move money into accounts she controlled, and then disappear when things got hot. Brad was her mark. One of several, according to the FBI. They're very interested in talking to her. Will's smile was grim. She was on a flight to Miami when they picked her up. Thought she could slip away while everyone was focused on Brad. Victoria leaned forward. Here's the interesting part. When the FBI showed Brittany the evidence against her, she immediately offered to flip. She's giving them everything, not just on Brad, but on 4 other men she's scammed over the past 5 years. She's cooperating? Enthusiastically. Turns out Brittany's survival instincts are even stronger than her greed. Victoria checked her phone. The DA wants to meet with you this afternoon to discuss your testimony. But first, I have employees to meet. Maggie stood up. Dorothy, is everything arranged? The main warehouse staff is gathering at 7. I told them the new owner wanted to introduce herself. They don't know it's you yet. Good. Maggie straightened her shoulders. Let's go. The Thornton Distribution main warehouse was a massive facility on the south side of Chicago. Maggie had been here hundreds of times over the years, but always as Brad's wife, the quiet woman who occasionally helped with paperwork and never said much. Today, she walked through the front door as the owner. Dorothy had gathered the staff in the main break room, about 60 people from the first shift, looking confused and worried. Word of Brad's arrest had spread, and they didn't know what it meant for their job. Maggie took a deep breath and stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room. Good morning, she said. Most of you know me as Maggie Thornton, Brad's wife, the woman who helped with filing and made coffee when clients visited. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. What you don't know is that my real name is Margaret Blackwood. 25 years ago, I left my family and everything I had because I wanted to find out who I was without the Blackwood name attached. I met Brad, fell in love, and helped him build this company from nothing. She paused, letting the words sink in. What you also don't know is that I wrote the business plan that secured our first major investment. I negotiated the Walmart contract that put us on the map. I designed the logistics software that runs this warehouse. And in 2018, I invested $500,000 of my own money to fund our expansion. The silence in the room was absolute. Brad didn't want anyone to know those things. He wanted to be the self-made man, the genius entrepreneur who built an empire from nothing. So I stayed quiet. I let him take the credit. I told myself it didn't matter because we were partners, and partners don't keep score. Maggie's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. I was wrong. It does matter. Credit matters. Recognition matters. Being seen for who you really are and what you really contribute, that matters. And for 25 years, I let someone else erase my contributions because I thought love meant staying invisible. She looked out at the faces of her employees, men and women who had worked for this company for years, who had given their labor and loyalty to a man who had been lying to all of them. Yesterday, a judge ruled that Brad committed perjury and fraud. The company legally belongs to me now. Not because I'm a Blackwood, not because I have money, but because I built this place with my own hands, my own mind, my own heart. The law finally recognized what some of you have known for years. A woman in the front row, Sarah, Dorothy's daughter, was wiping tears from her eyes. I know you're worried about your jobs. I know you're wondering what happens next. So let me be clear. Nothing changes for you. Your jobs are secure. Your benefits are secure. The only thing that's changing is the name on the door. Maggie took a deep breath. And the way this company treats its people. She pulled out a folder Dorothy had prepared. Effective immediately, I'm implementing the following changes. First, a 5% raise across the board for all hourly employees. You've earned it, and you've been underpaid for years. A murmur of disbelief swept through the room. Second, we're expanding health coverage to include mental health services and family leave. Third, I'm creating an employee profit-sharing program. When this company succeeds, you succeed. That's how it should have been from the beginning. The murmur turned into something closer to a roar. People were clapping, cheering, some of them crying. Maggie held up her hand for quiet. There's one more thing. I know that some of you were treated badly under the old management. I know that some of you raised concerns and were ignored or punished. If that happened to you, I want to know about it. My door is open. And if you were wrongfully terminated, we're going to make it right. She thought of Keisha Williams, working in a warehouse in Joliet for $12 an hour because she dared to tell the truth about Brad's theft. This company isn't going to be a place where honesty is punished anymore. It's going to be a place where people are valued for their contributions, recognized for their work, and protected when they do the right thing. Maggie felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks, but she didn't try to stop them. That's my promise to you, not as a Blackwood, not as Brad's ex-wife, but as the woman who built this company alongside all of you. The applause that followed was deafening. Afterward, Maggie spent 3 hours shaking hands, answering questions, and listening to stories. Story after story of Brad's cruelty, his dismissiveness, his tendency to take credit for other people's work. But also stories of small kindnesses that Maggie had shown over the years, remembered favors, thoughtful gestures, moments when she'd stood up for someone who needed defending. You probably don't remember me, said a young man near the end of the line. I'm Jake Martinez. I started in the mailroom 8 years ago. My mom was sick, and I was going to have to quit to take care of her. You found out and arranged for my schedule to be changed so I could work around her appointments. You never told anyone. I only found out because Dorothy let it slip. I remember, Maggie said softly. How was your mother? She passed last year, but those extra 3 years I got to spend with her, that was because of you. Jake's voice broke. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. Maggie hugged him, not caring about professional boundaries or corporate hierarchy. Some things mattered more than protocol. By noon, she'd visited 2 more facilities and spoken to over 100 employees. The response everywhere was the same: shock, relief, and an overwhelming sense of justice finally being served. She was exhausted, but energized when Victoria called with an update. Brad's arraignment is this afternoon. He's being denied bail. Why? Flight risk. The prosecution showed the judge evidence of his offshore accounts and the fact that he'd been researching extradition treaties on his laptop. Victoria's voice was dry. Apparently, he was planning to run to a country without a U.S. extradition agreement. He was going to flee the country? He was going to try. The FBI's been monitoring his internet activity since the forensic accountants flagged the offshore accounts. He's been reading about Montenegro, Argentina, and the UAE for the past 6 months. Maggie sat down heavily. He was planning this, even before the divorce. It looks that way. The prosecution's theory is that he was setting up an exit strategy in case anyone ever discovered the embezzlement. The divorce was just the trigger that accelerated his timeline. So when he offered me $5,000 and told me to disappear, he was probably planning to disappear himself within a few months. Take the money he'd hidden, meet up with Brittany somewhere without extradition, and start a new life. Victoria paused. You weren't just inconvenient to him, Maggie. You were an obstacle to his escape plan. The full scope of Brad's betrayal hit Maggie like a physical blow. It wasn't just that he didn't love her. It wasn't just that he'd stolen credit for her work. He'd been planning to abandon her and possibly frame her for his crimes while he fled to another country with his 27-year-old accomplice. What happens now? Maggie asked quietly. Now we let the justice system do its work. Brad is facing 12 to 15 years if convicted on all charges. Brittany is looking at 5 to 7, even with her cooperation. The FBI is unraveling their whole operation. And the company? He's doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Victoria's voice warmed. Your speech this morning made the news. Local stations are calling you the hidden heiress who built an empire. The story is going viral. Apparently, everyone loves a tale of a woman who funded her husband's dreams and then reclaimed her legacy when he tried to throw her away. Maggie laughed weakly. I didn't do it for the publicity. No, but the publicity doesn't hurt. Your company's stock value just went up 12%. Based on investor confidence in the new leadership. People believe in you, Maggie. That evening, Maggie sat in Will's study, watching the sunset paint the sky over Lake Michigan. It had been the longest week of her life, and it was finally over. How are you feeling? Will asked, handing her a glass of wine. Empty, Maggie admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad about what? 25 years, Will. 25 years of my life, and it was all built on lies. His lies about who he was, my lies about who I was. Neither of us was real with each other. You were real. You loved him genuinely. Did I? Maggie stared at her wine. Or did I love the idea of him? The ambitious underdog who saw something special in me. Maybe I was just as deluded as he was. Will sat beside her. Mags, you're not responsible for his choices. You gave him everything: money, ideas, support, love. What he did with those gifts was on him, not you. I know, but I can't help wondering. If I told him the truth from the beginning, would things have been different? Would he have been a better person if he'd known his wife was a Blackwood? No. Will's voice was firm. He would have been the same person, just with access to more money. You can't fix broken character with resources. You can only reveal it. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I want to visit him. Will nearly dropped his wine. What? Not to reconcile. Not to forgive. I need to close this chapter properly. I need to look him in the eye and tell him goodbye. The real goodbye. Face to face. Mags, he tried to destroy you. He was planning to flee the country and leave you holding the bag for his crimes. I know.
Maggie met her brother's eyes. "But if I don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I would have said. I need to say it. Then I can move on." Will stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I'll have Victoria arrange it, but I'm coming with you." "You don't have to. I'm coming with you." His voice left no room for argument. "You're not facing that man alone, ever again." 3 days later, Maggie walked into the Cook County Jail. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, institutional glow. She'd never been inside a jail before. The smell was what struck her first. Disinfectant and despair, mixed with something she couldn't identify. A guard led her to a small visitation room. Will waited outside, as close as regulations allowed. And then Brad was there, on the other side of the glass. He looked terrible. 3 days without his expensive grooming products had left him gray and haggard. The orange jumpsuit hung on his frame like a surrender flag. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he picked up the phone on his side of the partition. Maggie picked up hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other. Two people who had shared a bed, a life, a dream for 25 years, now separated by bulletproof glass and the wreckage of everything they'd built. "Maggie," Brad's voice was hoarse. "You came." "I came to say goodbye, Brad. The real goodbye." "I know you hate me," his eyes filled with tears. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But I want you to understand, I never meant for it to go this far. The money, the lies, Brittany, it all just spiraled out of control. I lost myself somewhere along the way." "You didn't lose yourself, Brad. You found yourself." Maggie's voice was steady. "This is who you always were. I just refused to see it." "That's not true. I loved you. In the beginning, I really did love you." "Maybe, in your own way. But you never loved me enough to see me as an equal. You never loved me enough to share credit for what we built together. You never loved me enough to be honest." Brad's face crumpled. "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry, Maggie, for everything." "I know." Maggie felt a strange calm settling over her. "And I forgive you." Brad looked up, startled. "You do?" "Not for your sake. For mine." She leaned closer to the glass. "I'm not going to carry this anger for the rest of my life, Brad. I'm not going to let what you did define who I am or what I become. You hurt me. You betrayed me. You tried to erase me. But you failed." She stood up. "Goodbye, Brad. I hope you find some peace in there. I hope you use this time to become a better person. But I won't be here to see it. I'm moving on. I'm building a new life, and you're not part of it." "Maggie, wait!" There's nothing left to say. She put her hand on the glass, not reaching for him, just marking the boundary between them. "I loved you for 25 years. I gave you everything I had. And now I'm taking it all back. Not the money, not the company, but myself, my identity, my future. Those belong to me, and I'm done sharing them with someone who never appreciated them." She hung up the phone and walked away. Behind her, she could hear Brad's muffled voice calling her name through the glass. She didn't turn around. She didn't slow down. She walked out of the jail and into the sunlight where Will was waiting. "How do you feel?" he asked. Maggie breathed in the fresh air, filling her lungs with freedom. "Ready," she said. "Ready to start over." 6 months later, Maggie stood on the rooftop of the newly renamed Blackwood Distribution Headquarters. The Chicago skyline spread out before her, glittering with possibility. Below, 200 employees were gathering for a celebration. The company had just posted its best quarter in 15 years. Victoria appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Hell of a year," Victoria said, handing her a glass. "Hell of a life." Maggie took a sip. "Did you hear about Brad? Pleaded guilty last week. 12 years, eligible for parole in 8. And Brittany? 4 years in a minimum security facility. She gave up every man she'd ever scammed. The FBI was very grateful." Maggie nodded slowly. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel vindication. She felt something quieter, more sustainable. Peace. Dorothy joined them, beaming. "The new employee profit-sharing checks went out today. You should see the break room. People are crying, hugging each other, calling their families." "Good," Maggie smiled. "That's what this company should have been from the beginning." "There's something else." Dorothy's eyes were twinkling. "Keisha Williams is here. She wants to thank you personally." Maggie turned to see a young woman approaching. The woman Brad had fired for discovering his theft. The woman Maggie had hired back and promoted to head of internal auditing. "Mrs. Blackwood." Keisha's voice was thick with emotion. "I just wanted to say, 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was blackballed in the industry. Nobody would hire me. And then you found me and gave me another chance." "You gave yourself another chance," Maggie said. "I just opened the door." "You did more than that." Keisha pulled out her phone and showed Maggie a photo, a small house with a red door. "I just closed on my first home. Because of this job. Because you believed in me when nobody else did." Maggie hugged her. "You earned every bit of it, Keisha. Never forget that." After Keisha left, Will appeared with a fresh bottle of champagne. "Speech time, Mags. The employees are waiting." Maggie took a deep breath and walked to the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the crowd of people who had gathered to celebrate their collective success. 25 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the evening air, "I walked away from everything I knew because I wanted to find out who I was without my family's name. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I was worth." She paused, looking out at the faces of her employees, her people. "I learned something in those 25 years. I learned that you can't find yourself by hiding from who you are. I learned that love isn't about making yourself small so someone else can feel big. And I learned that the people who really matter, the ones who truly see you, they don't care about your name or your money. They care about how you treat them, how you show up, how you fight for what's right even when it's hard." She raised her glass. "This company was built by all of us, not one man's vision, but hundreds of people's hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. And from now on, that's how we're going to run it. Together, as equals, as partners." The cheers that rose from the crowd drowned out everything else. Later that night, Maggie sat alone in her new office, the corner office with a view of the lake that Brad had always claimed for himself. She'd redecorated it completely. New furniture, new art, new energy. On her desk was a framed photograph, not of Brad, not of their wedding, but of herself at 25, standing in front of the Blackwood estate in Lake Forest. Young, hopeful, ready to conquer the world. She picked up a pen and signed the last document of the day, a charitable foundation in her mother's name that would provide scholarships to first-generation college students. Then she turned off the light, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the Chicago night. The city spread out before her, full of possibility. She was 52 years old. She'd lost a quarter century to a man who didn't deserve her. But she'd gained something too. Wisdom, strength, and the knowledge of exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Brad Thornton had told her to leave with nothing. Instead, she'd taken everything. Not his money, not his company, but her own power, her own voice, her own truth. And she was never going to let anyone silence it again. That's the thing about underestimating someone. You give them the greatest gift of all, the element of surprise. Brad saw a quiet wife, a helpful secretary, a nobody from nowhere. He never saw the architect of his empire, the strategist behind his success, the woman holding up the very foundation he stood on. When she finally let go, he didn't just fall. He shattered. Some people spend their whole lives building empires on lies, never realizing that the people they step on are the same ones holding them up. Brad Thornton learned that lesson too late. Maggie Blackwood learned it just in time. Because in the end, the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the loudest voice or the biggest title. It's the one who knows exactly what they're worth and isn't afraid to prove it.